What would you do if your manager was a power-hungry tyrant who pushed a coworker to a mental breakdown? In today's story, the protagonist's response is a masterclass in karmic justice. Many years ago, when I was 16, I got my first job at a fast food place we'll call Southern State Not Baked Poultry. It wasn't a bad gig. Mostly because my best friend's stepdad was the assistant manager. We'll call him Dave. Dave was a genuinely good manager who actually cared about his employees. Before the store opened, he'd let us blast music from his office while we did prep work. As long as the work got done well, he wanted us to have fun doing it. This story, however, is about our store manager, a man we'll call Martin. Martin was the polar opposite of Dave. With him, fun was strictly forbidden. Everything had to be taken with life or death seriousness. I truly despised working with Martin. He was an egocentric, power-hungry, petty little man who acted like being a manager for Southern State Not Baked Poultry made him a king. His management strategy was simple: work an employee to the point of burnout, then fire them and hire a replacement. Unsurprisingly, morale plummeted whenever Martin was on the clock. He hated that the crew preferred working with Dave. He hated that we had fun on Dave's shifts. He hated that our store's numbers were consistently better when Dave was in charge. But the one thing he loathed most was a silly little greeting Dave used to do. If you walked in for your shift before we opened, he would stick his tongue between his teeth and lower lip and belt out, "Hi. Name?" It sounded completely ridiculous. And I'd always reply in kind, with something that sounded like, "Hi. Dave ID." To give you a clear picture of the kind of man Martin was, let me tell you about a young woman who worked with us. After a particularly grueling shift with Martin, she attempted to take her own life due to a variety of stressors. After she recovered, she called the store to find out when Dave was working so she could come get her last paycheck. Dave sat her down in the lobby, bought her lunch, and just talked with her for an hour. He made sure she was doing okay and let her talk about whatever she needed to. By the time she left, she was smiling through tears, having never had someone just listen to her like that. The next day, Martin hauled Dave into the office, a tiny cube with no ceiling, so you could hear everything. I heard Martin's exact words: "The next time the suicide queen comes in, tell her to do it right next time." It was at that moment Martin sealed his own fate. He couldn't know it then, but by revealing the true depths of his cruelty, he had just handed us the very weapon we would use against him. This brings us to the revenge. We got word that the regional and national executives for Southern State Not Baked Poultry were coming for their annual inspection. Martin, of course, had his eyes on a promotion. In his mind, he was a shoo-in. After all, he did everything by the book. And that's what made a good manager, right? Everything had a procedure and a checklist in the book. And if you failed to meet those expectations, he would berate you. This revealed Martin's greatest fatal flaw: his absolute conviction that management was a science of checklists, not an art of leading people. He believed the book could save him, never realizing the people he abused were about to write a new chapter. Several of us agreed that on the day of the inspection, we would all screw up just enough to make Martin blow his top. We knew the corporate bigwigs preached that employees were valuable team members of the Southern State Not Baked Poultry family. We were about to test that theory. The day arrived, and the executives were there for their tour. The plan went into motion. Whoops! One of the fryers hadn't had its oil replaced from the night before, Oh look. The shaker table is still dirty. Darn. We seem to have made way too much coleslaw that will have to be tossed. Crap. There isn't nearly enough poultry in the cooker to get us through the lunch rush. Man. Someone forgot to preheat the second cooker. An ordinary manager might have been stressed. A good manager, like Dave, would have rallied the team. But Martin wasn't ordinary or good. He was a pressure cooker with a faulty valve. And we were methodically turning up the heat. After I took a minute too long to get a basket of poultry into the cooker for the second time, Martin absolutely lost his cool. He started yelling, cursing, and throwing things. Then he physically shoved me away from the breading station. He did this in the middle of the lunch rush, in front of the regional manager and several executives from the national office, in front of a line of customers at both registers and a lobby full of people eating. The entire restaurant fell silent, save for the beeping of a finished fryer. Martin just stood there, gulping like a fish, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. This was the moment we had been waiting for. I looked down at my chest, where he had pushed me, and saw the perfect, flowery imprints of his hands on my shirt. Then I let him have it. I yelled that I quit, tore off my apron, and threw it at him. I told him I was sick of his abuse, his terrible management, and how he single-handedly destroyed morale every time he walked in the door. I told him he was a pathetic excuse for a manager and that if it weren't for Dave and a couple of good shift leads, he would have run the store into the ground long ago. All the color drained from his face as he bolted for his office cube. The corporate execs ended up giving everyone in the restaurant a free meal. Interestingly, Martin wasn't fired. He was demoted to assistant manager. And Dave was promoted to store manager. About 10 years later, I was working as an EMT. My partner and I had just dropped a patient off at the hospital across the street from that same restaurant. On a whim, we pulled in. I hadn't set foot in there since the day I quit. And who was working the counter but Martin himself? His name tag still read assistant manager. The restaurant was empty, and I just couldn't resist. I looked him right in the eye, stuck my tongue between my teeth and lower lip, and shouted as loud as I could, "Hi, Martin." The look on his face was priceless. It's a strange feeling, having the power to make a grown man flinch with just a silly greeting. I haven't been back since. And that was about 12 years ago. Sometimes I wonder what happens to people like him, stuck in a job they clearly hate, stewing in their own bitterness. But honestly, I'm willing to bet he's still there. Still just the assistant manager. Ultimately, this story is a perfect example that treating people with cruelty and disdain is a failing strategy. True authority comes from respect, not a title on a name tag. And those who rule through fear often end up victims of their own toxic environment. Have you ever had a boss who got exactly what they deserved? Share your story in the comments below.